it's like by the time you get a thought that comes up to your head that you can actually hear consciously in your head,
Mm-hmm.
it's like that's built on top of so many sets of assumptions and horizons and meanings that you're standing on top of to be able to think that those thoughts and those words to be able to hear it. So you're not meaning necessarily just like thoughts that you consciously think in your head that you can hear in your head, but you're meaning these very, very deep, deep, deep thinking in the broader sense of the word.
Yeah. The horizon of horizons.
Horizon of horizon.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If, in Jordan Peterson's style, the
Yes.
goal that we set gives meaning to everything, right? Because until you know where you're going, you can't know if the thing you're going to do leads towards it or away.
Yep.
Right. So that the goal, the ultimate goal that you're headed for, guides you in your values of good or bad. Good, that which leads me to the goal. Bad, that which leads me away from the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
And the goals we choose create the path, the narrative, the story that gives order to everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, as I say, look around the room as an interior decorator, look around the room as an architect.
Yeah.
It changes the order of everything else, that the facts are in the context of a goal, and that goal has a horizon towards which we're moving, that goal is within a story, and that story can be understood as a horizon in which things appear on the path to that goal.
Mm-hmm. The goal, I just want to repeat what you said, the goal can be the horizon upon which gives what appears on the path on the way to the goal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And or the goal is the horizon. The goal sets the horizon.
Yeah.
The world in which we believe we are is given to us by the goal.
Yes.
By the horizon that we're looking at. So
Yes.
the goal creates the world, and then the world holds the goal, and then there's a horizon within the world that we're moving towards.
Yes, which is my understanding is the kind of the opposite of the way that we normally think about it, right? We think about like, I'm here and I'm going to go over there, and that the here is somehow more real than the there, or more determinate than the there. One of the ways I got at this one time was when I used to do these kind of like walking and talking videos with my phone. It was really fun. But I was talking about the notion of a horizon and trying to really get at it, because it's really fascinating actually when you start to think about what a horizon is and all the things it does, and how philosophically rich it is as a metaphor and as a notion. But I started the phone, and you can imagine this, like I put the phone down towards the ground and said, okay, now notice your experience of like, all you see is like dirt and weeds and stuff like that. Okay, now notice your experience as I just started to move the camera up this way. And then you started to see trees, right? And then you started to see water. And at a certain point you saw the ocean, and then the horizon of the ocean, and then the Golden Gate Bridge. And then I was like, okay, now that's the horizon. Now look back on the ground. So there's this way in which before you knew what the horizon was, you really didn't know where you were. Mm-hmm. But once you saw the horizon, that very same ground that you were looking at the first time became so, like it became so much more present and had so much more meaning, given because I knew the horizon. Mm-hmm. Is that are we driving in terms of a shared understanding of that?
Yeah, creating a shared vocabulary around it. Vocabulary around it. Yeah, I think so. So things only become meaningful in the context of a goal.
Yes.
Right? Like, what is meaning? What is meaning? In Keys in the Darkness, I define meaning. I say that something becomes meaningful when it impacts the unfolding of a story. If an event happens and it impacts the unfolding of a story, then that event is meaningful in that story. Right? If an event happens which does not impact the unfolding of the story, it's not meaningful in that story.
Right. Like the guy in Africa right now who just broke his shoelaces.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything to us.
It's not right. It's not meaningful in any story that we're paying attention to.
Yep.
Right.
So
Now, if we could show how that guy breaking his shoelaces has a set of side-on effects that ends up impacting the story that we're focused on, then it becomes meaningful in that story.
Yes.
But for something to become meaningful, when we say that something is meaningful, we mean that thing, that event, has an impact in a story. And so it's meaningful in that story.
So if I were to say, like, okay, the guy in Africa is actually my grandfather who has dementia and is crippled, that will be meaningful to me. I may feel scared. I may feel concerned. I may want to call him. I may want to call.
Well, yes. I'll say one more thing and it'll come together. So in order for something to be meaningful, it has to impact the development of some story. In order for it to be meaningful to you, it has to impact the story that you care about.
Yeah.
Right? The more any particular event impacts a story, the more meaningful it is in that story. And the more it impacts a story that you care about, the more meaningful it is to you.
Yeah, totally.
Right? So the ground, you're looking at the ground, you're looking at anything, you look at an object, right? You've got this object, and this object is just a pen. Right? Until and unless I use it as a metaphor for understanding multiple dimensions of the same thing. And then it becomes meaningful. So all of my clients, when I hold up this pen, there's all kinds of stories attached to this pen, attached to their life, where we've looked at some aspect of their life, and I've talked about their life in terms of the pen. And so now the pen is meaningful in their stories.
Yes.
Right. The more meaning, the more it impacts a meaning, the more it impacts a story that they care about, the more meaningful it is to them. So when you were first showing the ground in your, it was just ground. It had no meaning. In what story is it meaningful? It doesn't have a story in which it can take on meaning. It's just dirt. But once you put the dirt in the context of being near the Golden Gate Bridge, being someplace near water, then that piece of fits into a larger story.
Yes.
Now, if the person says, if I were standing there, then I could see the Golden Gate Bridge, then that place is meaningful to them. It becomes meaningful. The horizon is the space in which meaning happens.
Yeah.
The horizon, right, when we're speaking metaphorically in terms of meaning, when we're speaking in terms of shared reality and where we headed, the horizon is a metaphor for the edge of the story. Like the goal towards which we're moving.
Yes. As
represented as the goal, that which we are moving towards.
Right. Totally. Is it fair to say that the more meaning given by the horizon, the more emotion one is likely to feel about the things that are meaningful? What's the connection between meaning and emotion?
What's the connection between meaning and emotion? Yes. And the different kinds of meanings for the different kinds of emotion. different, of course, and again, we're into the realm of definitions and semantics. When you could say the thing that started me off on this journey, besides being a suicidal kid and getting into therapy, at one point, finally, my therapist.
That's probably enough right there.
Yeah, my therapist finally gave me a book called Frogs into Princes, right? One of the early books on neurolinguistic programming, and I read the book, and I came away from the book with a basic formula, and that is that the emotions that we experience are a function of how we interpret our experience. Like, we feel emotions based on what we think is happening. And what we think is happening is a function of what we think. That our emotions are the consequence of our thoughts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That like, if I'm going to get angry, it's because I believe some boundary of mine has been violated. If I get sad, it's because I believe I've lost something. It's because I believe something.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, yes, absolutely. Meaning creates emotion. And the kind of emotion we feel and the intensity of emotion we feel will be a function of the meaning. The meaning's the function of the story and the horizon that encapsulates the story, that contains the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something can happen which is meaningless. In one story.
Yeah.
But then we change the story, we change the horizon, we change the meaning, and then we change the emotion.
Yeah.
Right. But if emotions do come from meaning, and I'm very comfortable saying that emotions come from meaning. Right. It might be an unconscious meaning.
Yeah.
Right. But we can figure it out.
Right.
Why did you feel that way? Oh, because. And then we come up with what was the story I was telling, such that the thing that happened was meaningful in a way that led me to have that emotion in that story. Right? Half of coaching is changing the horizon, changing the story in which you're interpreting something.
Yeah, totally. And wouldn't you say, because I'm just imagining some people who are watching this are going like, well, thinking, thoughts, like, don't I feel stuff and then think about it? And I'm imagining that most people, when they think of thoughts, they think of that conversation that you're conscious of in your head. And I don't think that you just mean those kinds of thoughts. What do you mean? Is it by what you're referring to as beliefs and meaning, right? Is more like the thinking, or you could have deeper level thoughts that aren't necessarily audible, like auditory voices that you hear yourself thinking in your head. They're more like background kinds of thoughts or assumptions that are less verbal, right?
Yeah, totally. Verbal thought is what are they? It's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, totally. It's like by the time you get a thought that comes up to your head that you can actually hear consciously in your head, it's like that's built on top of so many sets of assumptions and horizons and meanings that you're standing on top of to be able to think that those thoughts and those words to be able to hear it. Yep.
Yes. So
you're not meaning necessarily just like thoughts that you consciously think in your head that you can hear in your head, but you're meaning these very, very deep thinking in the broader sense of the word.
Yes. Oh, and like you said, that there's a whole series of contexts and horizons and stories and narratives that build up to a sentence in your head. Oh, he was mean to me.
Yeah, totally.
Right. The he was mean to me is built on a whole set of experiences, and it points to a whole series of things. And once you have said he is mean to me, that sentence can kind of fix a whole set of ideas.
Yeah.
And then the phrase itself becomes part of that stack of ideas.
Yeah.
So often, like surprisingly often and crazily often, right? The thoughts that we think, the actual articulation that we say in our mind, oh, he was mean to me. And then we have an image and we have an emotion, a kind of mean, right? Because there's lots of ways to be mean. And this is the particular way that I'm configuring this meanness. We say that, and then that becomes part of the unconscious structure.
Mhm.
So our thoughts are more than the things we're saying, but the things we're saying are definitely part of the unconscious thinking, which is more than we're saying.
Yes, yes, yes.
So much of what we're thinking gets encapsulated in words and then forgotten and just becomes part of our unconscious processing. And yes,
Right.
all of that's the thinking. It's the understanding, it's the narrative, it's the horizon in which we whirl. If we're saying that we've got this horizon, and the horizon is a story with goals, and the horizon gives us kind of the edge of the goals and the narrative in which we're thinking, that horizon, the space of the horizon, is populated with all of the thoughts and beliefs and rules and expectations that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And almost all of that, when something happens, we judge the something in that horizon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we judge it as good or bad based on a deep, unconscious, intuitive sense for how the whole thing fits together.
Yeah, that deep, unconscious, intuitive sense is, like, you could say, how I think I experience that is whatever that is, that when I wake up in the morning, that has me know that I'm me, without checking and doing a reference check. Whatever that is, that has me not have to go and look at pictures and get information about, so I know that it's me when I wake up. I just know. That just know is I wake up and there's an atmosphere of familiarity of some kind. Right. So, like, I would say that how I've understood that in terms of what you're talking about are those layers of horizons and meanings of how things work, and the me, the story, and the me of, and also the background of what a me is, and then the particular me that I am is a whole, all comes together in this kind of atmosphere called Guy Singstock waking up in the morning.
Yeah. And we could say that atmosphere is the large horizon in which all of the smaller horizons live, and the smaller stories. And you can wake up and you can go, it's great. And you've just got this overall atmosphere. And then you look over and you see a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And that piece of paper is a project, part of a project that you're involved in. And you look over and you see the paper. And then of all of that atmosphere, that paper might have you go and start thinking about the project. Something about that piece of paper reminds, oh my gosh, and I got to do that thing. I totally forgot about it. And then that horizon becomes the major horizon. The rest of them goes away. The rest of the atmosphere goes away. And that's the story, which is dominant. And then you have the emotions that go with that story based on that thinking.
Right.
The thinking about that particular project and all the historical pieces that you've got in place, the stories you've told them, the feelings that you've had, the images you've built, like all of the things that you've populated that horizon with, each one of which represents symbolically events that have meaning in the unfolding of the story within the horizon.
Right. Makes sense.
Makes sense. Yes. So with that, horizon of horizons, this idea we were playing with in our last conversation, or that we came to, one of the ways that I like to understand a horizon is the potential outcome of the story. Right? So you've got a story. You could have a heroic character in that story, which you are or which someone else is. And that story, if things go well, could open up into a possibility.
Right. And that's what you're referring to as potential.
Yes, and I'm saying that the horizon that we think about is, you could say, the edge of our potential, what we think is possible in that story.
Yep.
Or what we think is likely in that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? What we don't want to have happen in that story, but we think might happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's as far out in the future as we think and we can imagine. That becomes the horizon for that story.
Yes.
And that horizon can change as you think about the story.
Yeah.
You can change what you think is possible in the story. You can change how far out you look. Right? Like, again, one of the things I'm doing in coaching all the time is I'm going, oh, you think about this project. Let's say someone's working on a project. They think about the project and they feel a certain way. Or there's a relationship within a project, or there's an event within a relationship, right? There's some, and they're thinking about it, this thing that they're thinking about, and they feel a certain way. Right? Well, again, using this model, they feel that way because of the story they're telling, because of the way that they're thinking about it, creates a set of meanings, and then they're feeling based on the meanings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So go in and say, oh, how are you doing that? You're feeling this thing. What's the story you're telling? How are you generating? What are the meanings you're generating? What's the horizon that you're looking towards? One of the aspects of the horizon is time. Like, it's often the case that when people think about something, they think about, like, oh, I have to do this thing. And they're thinking maybe 6 hours in advance. Like, the entire story only goes out 6 hours, and everything past 6 hours is just unconsidered. Right. And so everything's really important because it's like right here. And you just say, well, so what happens after that? I mean, let's say that happens. Then what? Oh, well, then I suppose I'll just adjust and do this other thing. Say, oh, yeah. And in the process, they move their horizon out, changes the story, changes the meaning of all the pieces.
It changes the story, and it also changes the emotion too.
Because it changes the story, it changes the meanings.
Yep.
And changes the emotions. So it's like general rule, right? The longer your time horizon, the less any one particular thing will upset you.
Yep.
And the longer your time horizon, the more you can see how you can make all of the pieces that are going to happen fit together towards your goal if you keep your goal in mind.
Yes.
It's like if you're going on a journey, any one particular step is okay. As long as you keep the goal in mind, you can just keep adjusting your course and take all the things that you find and head for your things. So the longer your time horizon, the clearer you are about where you want to go, the more you can navigate the terrain. And so your horizon, in this goal-oriented sense, is where you think you're going.
Yeah. And the other thing about the horizon, which I think is really interesting, is that the horizon will draw you towards it, right? But as it draws you towards it, when you actually say you hit the goal, right? You're now on the goal and you're in a new horizon. But you didn't reach the horizon. The horizon doesn't tell you where the horizon is, right, per se. It tells you the meaningfulness of what does it tell you? Well, the thing is as you walk towards it, as we know, a horizon moves with it. And this is what's really interesting to me about this. It was Adyashanti once said that that whittled in my brain for a long time. He said, and he was referring to the horizon of enlightenment, right? And he, to all intents and purposes in his world, He's in light now. He hit the horizon. And he says something really interesting about it. He says, I couldn't have wanted this. In fact, when I wanted what I called enlightenment, when I was meditating 20 hours a day or whatever in my early 20s, I wasn't wanting this. There's no way to want this. It's such a deep horizon. And I think about, for me, I think that why that whittled in my mind so much is like when I think about all the stuff in my life that I've accomplished or that are meaningful for me, that I feel proud of, or that are like rich for me, have that quality of I couldn't have wanted the thing. Although I wanted what I said I wanted, when I actually got it, I was a different someone through the process of wanting it, such that my experience of that end goal was being experienced by somebody else, right, than the person who originally had the goal. And that's this interesting part of, and I think that's what we started to touch on a little bit in the last video that we did, that had me like text you and say, hey, that thing that you just said, when I rewatched it, about the horizon of horizons, as part of the horizon is this openness to the unknown, right? That you can't ever reach the horizon in that sense, but the unknown is what is drawing you forward, right? The horizon of horizons. And we were connecting that to, I was attempting to connect that to what I think Jordan Peterson is talking about when he talks about religion, like a religious or meaningful experience. And that if there's something about like being present to and cultivating an awareness to that which is beyond your grasp, yet you feel compelled and moved towards something like, and it's with Adyashanti, maybe it's enlightenment or the Buddha, right? Like in the Western world, maybe it's Christ, right? Maybe it's some other kind of mythic hero of some kind. But that those images are packed with meaning, right? But they're not the kind of meaning that you can ever like accomplish in some way, because they speak to something so deep. Yet, if we orient our lives towards it, the kind of person that it calls forth to be able to like move towards that horizon, you went like this: the orientation to your goal. When your goal is far enough out, you don't have to get as upset, right, as when it's really close in. And so you're constantly orienting yourself. And this could be like, okay, I'm at this point. What's required of me now is, all right, I got to handle my taxes, right? And then you're over at this point, you're like, okay, I need to resolve this conversation with my wife. And then, okay, now I need to get fit. Okay, now I need to get more scheduled. I need to boom, 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 boom. And as you're kind of, I imagine it like this, as you weave, that relationship is like weaving a fabric, right? As you're engrossed in it. And then at some point you stop and you look back, there's this pattern that becomes more and more articulated and beautiful that I'll call the making of your character. And you said at that point, and you had this moment of like, you were like this, oh. And then you talked about, yeah, it's not the line that you can see and know about, but it's the thing that's implied in the line of the horizon, that's beyond the horizon, that gives the horizon itself. That is that mysterious meaning, character making weave that gets created when we orient ourselves to the unknown, or to the numinous, or to something deeply much greater and meaningful that's beyond what any one human being can fully articulate in some final way. And that's where I was like, we could spend a whole video
just talking about that. So let's go back to the Adyashanti for a moment, right? How I've been laying out this idea of horizons, or how we've been, but how I've been guiding it is that our horizon is the place towards which we look where this part of the story ends.
Yeah.
Like that's how far it goes.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm looking to achieve. And we imagine that horizon, that goal towards which we're moving, the end of the story or the fulfillment of the story. This is where the plot comes together and then I will do this and I will have written the book. And I've written the book, and then that's the thing, right? Or whatever the horizon is that we're looking at. The horizon is a function of how we consider it.
Yeah.
Like it's really a function of how we consider it. Adyashanti had a horizon of enlightenment. And that's what he was looking towards. He's like, that's where I want to get. And therefore, I'm going to take these actions. I'm going to invest my time and energy in these ways. I'm going to do these things. And if I'm doing those things, then I'm on track and things are good. I can relax and enjoy the ride because I'm on track to this horizon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so we've got this horizon. Now, as he got there, as he approached it, it was not what he thought it was. Now, does this mean that he was a fool? Or does this mean that something even more beautiful opened up for him?
Yeah.
Right? Well, in the beginning, he doesn't know. In the beginning, he doesn't know. What is the horizon beyond the horizon?
Yep.
What is the horizon that you're going to experience when you get to the landmark, right? I'm looking on the horizon and I see up there, there's a rock formation, or up there's an island and the island is on my horizon and I'm, right? Or I look out and there's a mountain on the horizon, or there's a lake on the horizon. That serves as a landmark.
Mm-hmm. When
I'm telling the story, it's like, okay, I'm going to this landmark, but that's where my story ends. I don't know what's beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something beyond that. There is this larger context in which this story takes place. What is that?
Yeah.
Right. And we could say that, well, once we get there, it might suck.
Yeah.
Like what's beyond that is hell.
Yeah.
Like the fact that we don't know it is hell, or is it heaven?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is where it's like what's beyond the horizon, we can have faith that which is beyond the horizon is even more beautiful than the horizon that we're imagining. We're imagining a horizon, assuming it's a positive horizon.
Mm-hmm.
What's beyond that horizon might be even more beautiful than we can imagine right now.
Right. In fact, wouldn't you say that would be one of the criteria?
Mm-hmm.
If when you get there, it's even more beautiful or more good or more whatever it is that's somehow connected to the thing that drew you to it in the first place. Wouldn't you say that that's part of one of the criteria that has you go, that was the right horizon. I'm on track.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. In retrospect, you can look back and say, I like where I've ended up.
Yeah. That retrospect part.
Yeah.
Is that the part? So there's coming back to kind of making sense of what Peterson's talking about, where he talks about the individual and the sovereignty of the individual as the basic unit of the thing that's like the most important, right, in his way of thinking about things. And if we say that like the Western horizon of horizons, right, is something like Christ, right? And yeah, was that right? Christ.
I'm filling in the story based on that.
Yeah, got you.
Yes.
Got you. Or something, whatever it is that is the ideal individual, right? Or represents the ideal place where man and God come together and expressed whatever that thing is, like Christ. If that's the horizon, and I start to orient myself towards that horizon and I go towards there, then isn't the idea of that the obstacles that I had to traverse, the things I had to work through as I'm truing myself up to that goal, right, to that horizon. By the time I get to that first horizon, that thing that I'm looking at is actually becomes, I think what he's saying is that's the experience of the divine or the eternal coming into the finite as a person, the making of character, of that there's the horizon and then there's the ride that I go on as I move towards the horizon. And now that I'm there, that person at some level is oriented and has been made in relationship to that horizon. And so in that sense is like, is that what he's talking about? And this is a question. Is that what he's talking about when he's referring to the basically the sacredness of the individual? Is that if you orient towards that horizon and you go on that ride, you will find somebody that's like in a certain sense perfecting that arche, or that perfecting that archetype of the sovereign individual.
Mm-hmm.
Am I conceptualizing that right? Or am I jumping ahead of what we're doing, what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if we had a there towards which we were moving, it would be easier to tell if we were on track or off track. So I'll feed it back to you in a couple different ways so we can tease apart why I'm like doing the golden retriever thing that I'm doing. Like, huh? What was that? Is that a sound?
Totally.
So one way of thinking about it is that the Western intellectual tradition, the Western philosophical, the West uses Christ as its telos, the horizon beyond the horizon.
Yeah, telos is the word. Yeah, it's a great word.
Right, that's the thing we're going towards, and to the degree that we're going towards that, and we're using that as our touchstone, if we're using that as our horizon and the horizon beyond that, and then we're somehow bringing it back down to, and I need to start with cleaning my room, but I'm going to clean my room in a way that I'm becoming more like Christ.
Yes.
Versus I'm cleaning my room in a way that I'm becoming more like something else.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The thing that we focus on our horizon is the context in which we tell the story of ourself. And therefore, when we look back on the self that we've created, that self is embedded in the story of the goal that we were going after. Mm-hmm. To the degree that that goal is Christ, then the character that we're building is Christian, Christ-like.
Right.
Okay. But now let's get back to Adyashanti.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He wanted enlightenment.
Right.
He had a very clear sense of it. He was spending 20 hours meditating. He had been studying it. He had studied with the masters, and he had a vision of what that horizon was that was fundamentally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It was fundamentally wrong.
Right.
When he got there, he realized that's not where he ended up. The thing he thought he was moving towards was radically inadequate to what it is that he got in ways that, right, in the joke of the spiritual journey is that if by the time you actually get what it is you thought you were getting, you absolutely discover you got something completely else. That the thing that you thought that you wanted, you didn't get. That's the irony. That's the joke of the spiritual journey. You thought you were trying to get something, and if you actually get it, you find out that you did not get the thing that you wanted. You got something else entirely.
Yes.
Right. So he has a goal, a horizon, and the horizon beyond the horizon, the telos, the the thing that he thinks the horizon is ultimately leading towards, and he has his landmarks that he's orienting towards. And he was wrong.
Yep.
So the character that he developed is a character that was off track.
Right.
When he looks back on his character, it's like, I was thinking I was trying to get to X, but really I was headed towards Y, and I was wrong. Well, so what is Christ? What is this Christ archetype?
Yeah.
Well, it's like enlightenment. It's only as good as our ability to imagine it, and our ability to imagine it sucks. I mean, it's impoverished. It's very, very crude at best, probably fundamentally misplaced. Right. But it is pointing in a direction of what we're calling good. But what is good? We don't know. We need to orient towards that and then take a bunch of steps and then look at what we've accomplished and look at where we're going and say, now let me refine my horizon. Let me refine what I believe to be good.
Yep.
Right. So what is the sovereign individual? Ayn Rand puts it slightly different terms than Jordan, but I think they're pointing towards very much the same thing. It's that it is the individual that thinks. It is the individual that can create a horizon and move within it and refine it. It's the individual that chooses. It's the individual that feels. And that's why we respect and honor the individual, because it's the individual that can grow.
Yeah.
Okay, now, here's the tricky part. The individual inherits the horizons of its culture.
Yep. Yep.
So this is the order and chaos, right? We inherit the horizons of our culture. If you have a quarter, there's a limited number of things you can do. Right. To the degree that you're inside the story of your culture, then you think, I need to be A, B, C, or D. There's a series of roles that I can play, and my job is to play them and to play them well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then reaches a point where you go beyond your culture, where you look at it and you say, I've used all of the ideas of my culture, and now I'm creating something new that goes beyond them. I'm freeing myself from the dictates of culture. I'm headed into chaos, but it's not chaos like hell. It's chaos like the unknown, which I believe to be increasingly beautiful. And if you set the goal of becoming increasingly beautiful and taking responsibility, that's the noble sovereign. Right? Because I can be an individual and just say, okay, the individual is sovereign. Therefore, screw everybody else. I'm just going to do what I want. Based on what? A very short time horizon. I'm going to do what I want to do today. Right? I want to win this game. I want the rewards from winning this game, and so I play the game in such a way that I win at any cost.
Right. Right.
And in the process, I piss off the other people that I'm playing with, so they don't want to play with me in future games. So I win the battle, but I lose the war of all of the future games because my horizon was inadequate.
Yes.
Right? And this gets us back into the Piagetian game idea, which is that we need to have a horizon.
Yeah.
Right. If we want to build a self that is increasingly beautiful and that extends the horizon towards more and more of what we want, like we need to choose a horizon that includes playing with people over time so that we can deepen our relationships with them and so that the relationships become more and more valuable. Whether that's a business relationship, like I don't screw my business partners. I do things where it's profitable for both of us, win-win. That way, we do an agreement, we do some kind of transaction, we both feel good about it, we both feel like we've gotten more out of it. So then we do more transactions. And the more transactions we do, the more trust we develop, the more complex the transactions, the more of the more of my resources I can invest into those transactions. And so I become richer and richer, or we become richer and richer because we're playing a win-win game. And the more
Right.
people I can play win-win games with, let's take our horizon and widen it to more people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Then me as the sovereign individual, like, which I'm the one who has to make the choice. I'm the one who has to decide,
Yes.
do I want to play a Piagetian game or not?
Yes.
Who am I going to choose as my hero? If I choose Christ as my hero, how do I envision Christ? What does that mean? Like
Right.
the thing
And how do I know to choose him as my hero?
right? And this is the thing I think Peterson is doing, and I think he underplays the role that he's playing in this storytelling. Like if I were to mimic Peterson or make fun of Peterson for a moment, I might say, look, these aren't my stories at all. Like, these are the stories that already exist in our culture. This isn't about me. This is just the stories are there. Yeah, sort of. It is true that the story of Cain and Abel exists in our culture, and it's just there.
But that you pick them.
But that you pick it, and that you take that, and then you weave an entire story around it of chaos and order and hero and dragon. Like, he's creating a new story. He's creating the horizon of horizons, the telos beyond the horizon that gives the horizon meaning. It's his creation that makes those stories valuable. A story is just a story. It must be interpreted to come to life. And it's how he's interpreting it that's the thing that matters, not the story itself. The story itself is... Yeah.
And then in some way, this story is now making him. It's making him for us. It's making him in the way that he's changing and being shaped by all the places that telling that story and picking that story is giving to him. We're seeing him develop, or, whatever your opinion is about what he's doing over time. That's the point about, when you were talking, something really came to me. I was listening to a lecture of a historian that was talking about like the ancient Greeks, and it was a class that was talking about the daily life of the ancient Greek. It was really fascinating. One of the things he said that really kind of like struck me is he started talking about their relationship to women, right? Mm-hmm. And he basically ripped on them. He's like, these people were pathetic and awful, right? They were so terrible to women, and they just laid out the patriarchal culture and the role of women and all this stuff. And that really bugged me. Like, it bugged me that he was doing that. And on one level, it bugged me because my first thought, well, why does this bug me so much? It's from their perspective, right? From their perspective, you're looking at it from your perspective on them and judging them. But actually, to me, the Greeks were doing something right in the whole, if you look at the whole timeline, if we say that like equal rights, right, to men and women, they did something right such that our connection to them was part of, or laid a horizon upon which, and a ground upon which we all are still in the movement of that history and that culture, such that we have rights, equal rights for women, and all the differences from there. But he wasn't acknowledging the game of evolution that I think that we were playing up till now, by looking back and going like, they were doing something wrong, or they were doing something bad. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think you can argue that we are where we are right now is a function of the tracks that they laid down. And as you were talking about the Piagetian games, right? And the, like basically winning, not just winning the game, but winning the game means not just winning, but how you play the game, who's involved, including more people, having a greater reach to more span, like all of that kind of stuff. I would say that, first of all, that's history of me. That's not great. That's like, just like biology. Like if you look at the history of biology, that's the history of me, of you. That's our history. I was just kind of really struck by, as you were talking about that, I was like, well, the Greeks weren't bad. They were extremely where they were, given the horizon and the understanding at that time, that had all of that make sense to them, including not being able to actually probably even see. There's no way they could probably even make that judgment call. However, there's something about the tracks that they laid down, right, that allowed us to have this conversation here in the place that women have in society now, which is extraordinary, in my view.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is like, compared to what? So this is the great economics question. It's also one of the main questions that I was taught in my early NLP training. It's like, compared to what?
Yeah.
Right? Like, against what are you judging the thing that you are judging?
Yeah.
Right? Like Jordan Peterson gets asked the question, well, how are women doing? How's the idea of female equality doing? And he's like, well, compared to what?
Yeah.
Compared to your utopia, it's an utter failure. Compared to human history on the whole, it's never been better. Right? We're killing it. Like, things are fantastic and they're getting better.
Right.
Right? Like most men didn't have the vote in the 19th century. Like, a very, very small percentage of men had the vote in the 19th century. Right? And then we expanded the vote so that more and more men got the vote. And it wasn't long after that before all women got the vote. Now, if you think there was a time when men had the vote and women didn't have the vote, and you just look at that time, then the thing that needs to happen is the women need to get the vote. Right? But if you think back to the time before the men had the vote, and then you go, okay, there's this large period of time where men didn't have the vote, and then now there's a little period of time where women didn't have the vote relatively, and then women got the vote. Okay, was that an abject failure? Was it is the time where the men had the vote but the women didn't have the vote, where the common man and woman the common man had the vote and the common woman didn't, and women didn't? Now, is that a failure? Was that a travesty? It's like slavery existed throughout human history.
Yeah.
And then we reached a point where we decided to make it illegal. Well, there was a point where we were saying slavery is wrong. And during that time, it's like, what does that mean? What are we going to compare where we're at against? What's the story we're telling? Right? Because you can always find a utopia against which the now is horrible. Right? It's certainly the case. You can look at statistically African Americans versus Caucasian Americans. And you can look at the statistics and you can follow them historically, and you can say, this is messed up. Right? Like, blacks and whites have never been more equal in American history. Right? There's never been a time where blacks have had as much opportunity as they have. Right? Does that mean that everything is 100% equal? No. Like, all hierarchies have within them certain types of corruption. That's true. Right. And you can always compare the hierarchy that exists against a utopia and find it to be completely failing. Right? Or you can look at what's the development of the hierarchy how is it going? Are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving towards the horizon? And what is the horizon beyond the horizon? Do we know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Against what? Compared to what? What are you judging it against? What is the horizon towards which you're moving? And what is the telos beyond that horizon? How do you conceptualize it? And is the individual choice the place that we're looking, or is it the structure? Like, we inherit our cultural structures.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you have a quarter, there's only so many things you can do. If you don't have a quarter, there's an unlimited number of things you can do.
Right. Totally. I think this is speaking to something huge right now.
Mm-hmm.
This very thing that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
like, is huge right now in terms of, like, it's the basis of identity politics, of the radical left, where and I remember something that you actually told me like years ago that's always stuck in my mind, right? You said a goal could either be a guiding light or a whipping post.
Yes.
Like, we all know that, like, you know, we set a goal, and the idea is that, like, there's as you would talk about it, there's the shame inducing way of relating to it, which is a moral, if I reach the goal or I fall short, is a moral determination of who I am as a person, versus the goal is the point that gets to reveal where I am in relationship to it. So if I fall short, right, it's not that I'm a bad person. It just, I am where I am in relationship to the goal. And if you use it as a guiding light, it can be a point of inspiration. But if you use it as like a whipping post, I don't know about you, but like, the way I relate to that is going to be much different.
Yes.
Much less inspired. And it reminds me a little bit about like where the state of kind of identity politics and this whole thing about like where people aren't really paying attention to like a sense of gratitude for the infinite amount of cultural, historical, philosophical layers, right, that we are sitting on top of, to be able to sit down and go, we are bad, or you're bad, or white people are bad, or black people are, or whatever it is that has us feel as though we're separate and not given by a movement of history and of culture, right, that allows for us to be able to sit down and even talk about it. It seems to me that it's more of that orientation where people are going like, look, that ideal, it's not met. We haven't met it yet. There's still dun, 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 and doesn't take in any account where we are in relationship to that ideal, right? Are we
and you know, Peterson's what is it, the fourth rule? I think it's like, measure yourself against your past rather than other people's present. Yes. Right. In NLP, we call it self to self, present to past comparisons. That if you want to determine your progress, right, if you want to determine how you're doing, you measure yourself against yourself rather than yourself against others.
Yeah.
And you measure your present versus your past rather than your present versus your ideal. Because, you know, I call it the great mind fuck. Our ideals grow exponentially. Every insight tells us a new possibility of who we can be, who we could be, if only.
Yeah.
And who we are is always limited compared to that. The more we expand our ideals, the greater the gap between who we are and who we could be. Like, I call that infinite failure. Like, we're always, if we're morally honest and if we're morally focused, we are always in a state of infinite failure compared to who we could be individually and as a culture. Right. And that's a different kind of horizon. If the horizon is, am I a good person? Right. If you're looking at the world and what you're looking for is evidence for whether or not you're a good person or a bad person, or whether or not someone else is a good person or a bad person, I call that the trial mentality. That's the question of shame. Am I good? Am I worthy? Am I lovable? Are they good? Are they worthy? Are they lovable? right? And that's a way of looking. It's a completely legitimate way of looking at things, but it has a certain character to it. It brings a certain attitude and, yeah.
Right. One question, what actually makes it legitimate? So it's a legitimate way of looking at it. And I was like, oh yeah, it's a legitimate way to look at it. But it's like, well, what actually makes it legitimate?
You can choose it.
Yeah. Okay. That I can choose it.
Yeah. And it's an interesting question. Am I good enough? Am I a good person?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that is a way that you can look at things and judge things.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Totally.
It just sucks.
Mm-hmm.
When people are focused on that,
yeah,
the value of their person is at stake, which is, I call it unfeelable. Like shame, this idea that who I am is not, it's so primordially painful that it short circuits our ability to think clearly.
Yeah.
It takes up so much bandwidth that we actually can't solve the problem. Versus, and let's contrast it, I call it the trial or the personal realm or the realm of shame. Let's contrast it with what I call game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Or the practical, or even guilt.
Yeah.
Right? Which is about, okay, how am I doing? Can I do better? What would be better?
Yeah.
And I think the great example of that is testing. We take a test. And if you want to learn something, let's say you're not in school, you just want to learn something and get good at it. Mm-hmm. Well, then you learn how to do something and then you test your capacity, you test your ability. Like, how much weight can I lift? I'm going to test my strength.
Right. Yeah.
And the test gives us information that we can use to guide ourselves to get better.
Right. And that guiding to get better
is an attitude.
Is an attitude.
And I'm calling that a game or the practical or the guilt, where it's, go for it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and it also seems to me that if the game I'm playing, or probably the unconscious game that I'm playing, is am I a good person? This is a measure to determine. For I'm a good person.
Yes, for purposes of definition and semantics.
Yeah, totally.
Right. I'm creating these terms.
Yeah. Totally.
And I'm saying that a game is focused on getting better. That you play a game for the fun of it in order to get better. And that if you're a good sport, then it's not about whether or not you're a good person.
Yeah.
Right. So that's game versus trial. Trial is you're on trial and you're like trying to prove that you're good enough. And so I want to distinguish this. So I would say, just for I'll request as a terminological thing, we don't play a game of whether or not we're good enough.
Yeah.
We either play a game in which we're trying to improve the value of ourself, the skill of ourself, the artistry of ourself, our ability to love, our ability to create, our ability to feel joy and appreciate life. We're either playing a game to increase our capacities, or we're on trial as to whether or not we're good enough. I'm trying to actually create a new term, that a game, we can't play a game about whether or not we're good enough.
And one of the things I just want to highlight is what I like about that is, and I think why I like it is because there's an assumption, there's kind of an assumption, an ontological assumption about what a human being is, which I think actually we can verify whether or not it's true, right? Like, I think what I like about the way that you're putting it is like, it's not who I am as a person, as if I'm a determined thing that can be measured, but it seems like what we mean by a person is my ability to gauge, my ability to reach a horizon, my ability to conceive of it. We're kind of more like a potential versus a thing that we can then measure in some determined way
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm going to bring in Ayn Rand again.
Am I accurate about that?
Yes. Let me.
Ontologies. It seems important.
I think it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical. This if I'm making a distinction between the world of a game, and the world of the trial.
Yeah.
Right, between the practical and the personal, between guilt and shame.
Yeah.
Right. I'm distinguishing this thing, and the thing that you're saying points right to the heart of it.
Right.
Right. So again, I'll bring in Ayn Rand. We're talking about horizons, and horizons is you have a goal, and because you have a goal, because you have a place you're trying to get to, you can actually determine, is the action I'm taking leading towards that, away from it? If it leads towards it, it is good in the context of that goal. And if it leads away from it, it is bad in the context of that goal.
Yeah.
But it's the goal that determines whether or not something is good or bad. That it is only in the context of a goal that we can have good or bad. And you could say this is Jordan Peterson's thing. Look, you have to choose a goal before you can determine whether or not something is good or bad. Before you can determine even what you should pay attention to, and therefore what exists for you. The facts are a function of the goal. Okay. Ayn Rand puts it like this. She says, whenever we say value, whenever we invoke the idea of a value, like something is valuable, there are always two implicit questions in that. There are two presupposed questions. And the question is, of value to whom and of value for what? Like something is valuable in the context of something. Like if we want to live, if we want as a human being to continue living, then nutritious food is a value. It is good for us. Right? But if we want to die, then poison is good for us. Right? So then the question becomes, well, can wanting to die be good? Right? But the goal that we set, the of value for what and of value to whom, anytime you talk about value, you're always implying valuable to whom and valuable for what. Now, let's look at the value of my person. Let's say we're going to judge the value of my person. We have dropped the context of to whom and for what. It is a dropped context value question. It is a nonsensical question. We can't be valuable as a person. We can be valuable towards a goal. But like you're saying, it's like there's this ontological reality, which is that if we want to talk about values, we have to talk about the context of the value. We have to talk about the horizon. We have to talk about the goal. And the challenge with the trial, the challenge with the idea of shame, is that we're saying, am I good enough? Am I worthy for what? It's unspecified. It's unspecified. And because of that, it goes all the way down. It's dropped context values. It's always in the context of the goal. And if we get that clear, then we recognize that anytime we're making a value judgment, we have to get clear about the goal and the context. What is the horizon? What is the story in which we're moving? What is the goal? And so with that in mind, let's get back to testing. Let's say that I want to learn how to program. Let's say I want to learn, right? Or I want to learn how to teach history, or I want to understand what happened historically. Well, then there's a series of facts that I can learn. There's a series of procedures I can learn that once I have learned them, that gives me the capacity to do something. For example, once I learn how to program, I can then create programs. Once I learn the facts of history, then I can then tell the story of history or herstory. Right? We can tell the story. If I don't know the facts, then I can't tell the accurate story. And if our goal is to tell an accurate story, then what we want to do is we want to test to see whether or not you've learned the facts. And so we in school, we have tests where you are taught a bunch of material, and then we test you on the material. Now, if you really want to learn, the test is the most valuable thing you can have, because it lets you know, have you learned it or not? And if you really want to be able to do it, then you have to test. Did I learn the material or not? And so the test is like the great gift in terms of learning. The test is where you get to discover where you're at relative to your goal so that you can recalibrate, re-aim, and redouble your efforts. The test is where all the gift is. Now, in school, we test people. We say, great, so we've got all this stuff. We tested it. Here are the what you got, and we go by the score. You got a 75 out of 100. That's pretty good. Good compared to what? A test for a number is worthless. We want to take the test so we can say, here are the ones you missed. Therefore, here's what you still have to learn so that you can actually learn the things you need to learn so you can build to the next level. And this, we can approach a test from two perspectives. One, what does it say about me? Am I a good person or a bad person? Am I an A student or a C student or a D student? And we can label you. And that is the worst possible use of a test. It misses the point. It drives people towards this shame, trial, am I good enough thing.
Creates a particular world.
Rather than actually using the feedback of the test in order to get better, which is what you want. Like if you're taking a test and you want to learn how to program, you take a test to, do I know it? Because if I don't know it, I'm not going to be able to do the thing.
Yeah.
If I go through the test, I got a 75 on the test. Yay. If I actually want to build something, getting a 75 on a test, it tells me I need to do better. And so there's this fundamental thing about the test. When you fail against your standard, when you set a goal and you measure, did I succeed? You can either look at it as, what does this say about me? Or how does it guide my future behavior? And this is the most important thing. You want to do self-to-self, present-to-past comparisons. You want to judge your current self against your past self so you can track progress towards a goal. Yeah. And this is, I think it's the most important thing. I'm going to say one more thing about identity politics, because I want to bring this together. Like one of the things that, I don't know, is so sad about identity politics from my perspective is that it's such an important topic. Yeah. It is such an important topic. Like, how do we as a culture treat women? How do we as a culture treat blacks? And I use black rather than African American because I'm a Thomas Sowell. Like, I'm trained by Thomas Sowell. Like, how do we treat transgendered people? How do we think about them? What is the story that we tell about them? Like, that is a profound question.
It's a really profound.
Because we have a history, like let's use blacks for a moment. Like, we have a history in the United States where we made them morally inferior to justify why we were enslaving them. I mean, it used to be we just enslaved people, and that was all cool, and that happened for tens of thousands of years, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years. Slavery was just part of life. You didn't have to have an excuse. You didn't have to have a reason to enslave people. You won. Like, there was a battle. You won. You took them as slaves. That's the natural order of things. Well, once individual rights started coming into existence, all of a sudden that story didn't work anymore. So in the United States, we had to start creating reasons for why we could enslave blacks. And we did that historically by making them morally inferior. They were morally inferior human beings. We denied their intelligence. We denied their their ability to reason. We denied their ability, like all kinds of things. We made them dangerous. We made them sexual predators, like everything. Everything we could do to delegitimize, we pretty much did.
Yeah.
And that got built into the stories of our culture.
Yep.
And that has an impact, right? And that is critical for us to recognize if we want to be good people, if we want to be cool to one another, if we want to recognize how we can treat people with greater and greater respect, if we want to recognize the sovereign individuality of other people, it's really, really smart to notice the stories we're telling about them. And so we have, and so we can take a test. For example, we can take a test on our white privilege. Again, just to continue down this road for a little bit. Yeah. We can actually examine how my white history and the worlds that I grew up in and the stories that I inherited from my culture, how are the stories that I've been built up in unfair towards blacks, towards African Americans? Like, I inherited a bunch of stories, and a lot of them aren't pleasant. They don't treat blacks with the same level of sovereignty as other whites, right? Or that's a hypothesis. Might be the case. Might be the case. Now, let's test me on it. Let's test me on it. Let me test myself on that idea to discover, what are my beliefs about it? Am I fair? Do I treat them the same? Do I tell the same kind of stories about them? Do I feel the same way when I meet them on the street? Like, let me test that. Now, on the trial side, basically what we're saying is, am I a good person or am I a bad person? Am I a racist? Am I a bigot, or am I a good person? And if I approach the test from that perspective, I'm not going to want to take the test. I'm not going to want to take that test because the test is basically threatening to call me a bad person. And so I'm going to delegitimize the test. But if what I want to be, what I want is to treat people like sovereign individuals, where each person is a unique, sovereign, beautiful, potential being, then I want to test myself so I can discover what my beliefs are, such that if they're out of character with the horizon that I want to go for, if it turns out that I have inherited ideas from my culture which I find to be disgusting, unfortunate, destructive, not good, then I want to know that. And this is the thing about testing. And so the thing that drives me crazy about it is, you've got identity politics. And you've got the ideas of structural racism, these various kind of systemic examinations of our culture and our cultural beliefs, and what are the stories and what are the horizons, and how do blacks and whites show up in that? How do women show up in that? How do the people show up in that, in those stories? I think it is imperative, beautiful for us to actually examine that.
Yeah.
But if you get people, if you say you're a bad person, you've got white privilege, you're a mean white man. Like, if you treat the test as a shame thing, then people won't want to take the test.
Right.
And it's counterproductive to the thing that is actually good.
Right.
And like this dark web, this intellectual dark web, from my perspective, like, I listen to Brett Weinstein, and Brett Weinstein's like, look, is there structural oppression? Yes. Do we have cultural stories that are biased in various ways? Yes. Like Jordan Peterson says, all hierarchies tend towards corruption. We have to be aware of that. Right? Are we going to say, is our culture perfect? The answer is no. Is our culture good? Compared to what? In what context?
Yeah.
And And that's where we can say our culture is the best, perhaps, that has ever been by many orders of magnitude, if our goal is to actually treat people and give them the opportunity for advancement.
Yeah.
Is there a lot more advancement we could provide? Yes. But does that mean that we're systematically like destroying people? I have to say the answer is no. Are there structural disadvantages? Yes. Like as Jordan Peterson says, like you've got intersectionality. There's lots and lots and lots of ways that people are disadvantaged and oppressed. Like we can come up with hundreds of ways that people are, in fact, oppressed. But how do we correct for them? And what's the consequence if we use this shame narrative to say, yes, because you've got these privileges, you lose, you're not good. You don't have a legitimate voice in the conversation because you have privileges. Like that to me drives me crazy. And I'm hoping this intellectual dark web conversation can get us beyond the test in terms of good or bad to the test in terms of how far are we? Self to self, present to past comparison.
Right.
How far have we come and what's our next step? And then our next step. And can we provide one another the grace and the gratitude to say we've made all of these steps. Now what's the next step? Let's make that step because it's better. But not get lost in identity politics. Okay. Thank you for letting me vent on that. In terms of the horizon beyond the horizon, if we trust that at each point we're going to hit the horizon and it's going to be different than what we thought.
I have to say,
but it's headed somewhere good.
Totally. It's headed somewhere good. And that's what makes a sovereign individual, is that they're oriented towards something that is as yet complete and determined and fixed, right? Like, it's not that we don't have thing-like aspects to us, right? But like, what makes us us? Like the difference between when we looked at African Americans as you are this, you are that, you are good or bad, or all of those things, we're kind of looking at people as things, right, that are definite. And when we look at them as sovereign individuals, I just really got it when you said that, like sovereignty it's something like, when I say you're sovereign, I'm actually looking at you, which is some part determined and there, right? But its there-ness is oriented towards something that isn't there yet, or is the possibility or a potential. And I'm going to relate to you as your potential, right? The possibilities that all of the things that are determined there can move towards. And it's that difference that seems to be, I just really, there's a certain moment where you just, the sovereign individual, and I just saw that difference. I was like, oh, that speaks to that horizon beyond the horizon.
I like what you're saying around that. That basically that when we treat someone like a sovereign, and when we act like a sovereign, that is both given by a horizon,
yep,
right, and extends a horizon to the horizon of horizons, the optimal future of horizons.
Yeah.
It gives us a direction to move, that by treating others as sovereign individuals and treating ourselves as a sovereign individual, and perhaps creating social structures that honor the sovereign individual and give them the freedom to choose, the freedom to think and speak, for example,
right,
that those sovereign individuals, right, will work things out towards an optimal horizon, where we recognize that each human being needs to be sovereign. Each being needs to grow towards that horizon. They grow that towards that horizon. The horizon gives them their sovereignty and cultivates their sovereignty to go to a horizon beyond that that's even more sovereign. And this is the heroic journey. I also want to bring in the idea of evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So before we go to evil,
before we go there, great.
So there is, I was thinking about, okay, so there's the horizon, the goal, the part of the thing that I can imagine, right? There's the part of like the goal that I can articulate, I can imagine, I can picture.
Mm-hmm.
But there's inherently in that, right, what calls forth that picture that I can't picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you would call those, I would think you would call that those values. Is that correct? Like what has me even pick that picture to move towards are the values that I have, or the
yes.
Like
and then there are the values that give you those values, and the values that give you those values. And where does that ultimate set of values come from?
Totally.
Where is that situated? Yeah.
And I was just thinking about like, well, what is in a way that's like really in my experience, I can actually experience it. What is that which connects me to the horizon of the horizons, that has me oriented to that which I can't picture or imagine?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where attention comes into play. The doing what I do to a living, which is something called, I'm a co-founder of a practice called circling, and I'll put a link and stuff like that. So if you want to check it out, but a lot of it has to do with really getting someone's world. And what is it? And I was thinking about this experience of what it takes to learn how to circle and to really get someone's world, or really pay attention, or really listen. And the thing I've noticed is that it has very little to do with knowing what to do and what actions to take. And it's more like knowing where to put your attention. And I've started to know, like, given, I think a lot of this has to do with some of my role in the development of circling, which is more of like I'm an artist. I'm pretty much through and through. So I'm kind of oriented towards the shoreline of the unknown. I just can't be any other way, right? So I'm constantly like furthering it and exploring it and discovering new things, and I'm less like the king of the castle of circling and telling everyone what to do, and I'm more like at the edge of it. Like, what the hell is this? Is it like what are we doing? I'm constantly asking that as a generative question, because I'm just oriented towards that. But what is it that actually, how do I know I'm oriented towards that? It's where my attention goes. And I think that that's what's interesting about we all, I think, have that experience where something can catch my attention that can then educate what I know, right? Where how attention can actually educate my thinking. But I think oftentimes we think about our attention as given by what I already know and what I think about, therefore what I can attend to. And on some level, that's actually true. But there's this other way in which my attention like is called to something, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, okay, that's valuable. Something's valuable there, and I think I know what I'm paying attention to. But as it unfolds, I realize why I was actually paying attention to it. I'm like, oh, this is what was compelling to me about this. Now, if you would have asked me before that what that was, I probably could have told you a story about what that was, right?
Like Adyashanti. Here's the horizon I'm going for. This is the story that I can tell about it based on where I'm at. But by the time I get there...
Yes. But here's the thing, is there's this interesting experience I have. And I've had it just lately. We were talking about it in the first video where it was like, for example, I told you, I've been reading Heidegger for 20 years. Right. And I've explained over and over and over again why I read Heidegger. But now I recently read a book, and all of a sudden a bunch of things came together, and I'm going, this is why I've been reading Heidegger. And I look back and I'm like, oh, all the stories I was telling up to this point weren't actually true. But it's not like, it was more of a sense of a recognition of what I think what I'm saying is my attention, whatever my attention knew to pay attention to, I found out as the process of getting there. And I'm wondering about what you think about this, about our connection to the horizon, beyond the horizon, has something to do with where our attention goes, what we pay attention to. That is some way transcendent to what what I'm enculturated by in some way, or some of the forms or the determinations that make me, or what I already understand. That I can actually notice something that I don't understand, right? But my attention is connected to it enough that I could then understand why I was paying attention to it. And there's something about that part where it seems to be connected to, on one level, I create a goal and I know to go to that direction because I think about it. And based on my understanding, it makes sense to go here, right? So there's a way in which I can kind of, in a certain sense, create my values or say what's important consciously.
You can logically deduce from a set of, okay, because I want these things, I can do that goal and I'm going to move towards it. And this goal is an expression of and an outgrowth of a set of premises towards which I'm moving, and it all makes sense.
Yeah, totally. But then there's this other way in which I find out why I'm moving towards it. Like there's this other way in which my attention seems to have a relationship with the unknown, in the sense of the beyond the horizon, that in some way is responding to it or can respond to it, at least sometimes. And I think it's kind of like this. It's like the way I've been talking about it lately. I can point right here to myself and ask myself, what am I up to in my life? Right? And then I can go, well, this is what I'm up to. This is why I'm up to it. But then I can point to the same spot and I can go, what is it up to? It's a very different sense. I'm pointing to the same spot, right? To the same entity, if you will, the same person. But I'm saying, what is it up to? And I think that there's something about the word it that starts to point to that thing of where, oh, I think I went to school to go here. But actually, right, the whole time, it's been up to this. Now I realize what I'm up to, and it's not what I thought. But as I was going, I can now understand that some part of me did know throughout, but not in a way that then my attention, whatever it is that I follow where my attention is, it then educates my thinking about what I can then say about what I'm up to. That there's something about the connection between the horizon of horizons, that which I can't picture or imagine, and attention. Just curious. What do you think? As an access point.
So of the 100 places to go with that, let's go back to Jordan Peterson and the hero.
Okay.
If we look at this, we can say that there is the known. There's the king. And the king has its kingdom and creates the thing, and it can do the thing, and that's it. And yes, and that's what I'm doing, and I'm doing this, and here's the goal, and here's how we organize the resources, and let's make this happen, and we do it.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's like we don't know, just go out and feel and see what's there. Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the hero. And the hero wants greater order than currently exists.
Yeah.
Right? And feels that there's something in the chaos that is available to it. It's like it's going into chaos looking for something.
Yeah.
In the same way that it's going from kingdom, I want to conquer new territory. I want to build the new tower. I want to do the next thing. What is that next thing? What is it that calls me to the next thing? And what is my relationship to that calling? Like what is it about me? What is it about it? This thing, this person, this self, what is it about it that has it want something? And then it understands it as a horizon, and it gives it a goal, and it gives it a name and comes up with, oh, I want enlightenment, or oh, I want to read Heidegger for this reason and this reason, right? But then you get into it, but you're looking beyond that. Like your best articulation, I always say that, language is absolutely horrible. Like our best articulation, our best logical understanding and description of what something is just so impoverished based relative to the reality of what is.
Yeah.
Right. And that I desire.
Yeah.
That I want something such that I focus my attention on it in a way that feels good, like I'm on track to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I envision that I want is always an impoverished representation of what I really want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually haven't yet been able to articulate what I really want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm encountering the world in a sense with a prefigured understanding of what it is that I want, but I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I can recognize it when it happens.
I can recognize it.
I can recognize more and more. Oh, it's more of that. It's more of that. It's more of that. Ooh,
and
I'm going.
Yeah.
And at each point, I attempt to articulate it. At each point, I attempt to name it, to create a symbol. Right? In story, we create a heroic figure, and we create a heroic context, so that we can encapsulate our best understanding of what it's like to be on the edge of using all of the resources that we have, to extend into the unknown, not to conquer the unknown, but to discover the unknown in a way that it becomes known and allows us to go even further. Like there's something about that which is, for lack of a better term, heroic. Right. And we create stories. Again, Ayn Rand says she created her characters, she created her stories as an artistic gesture to attempt to concretize this sense that she has for what is truly valuable, truly inspiring, truly beautiful, that she's attempting to examine her own conscience, her own sense for what is good, her own, Nietzsche might call it the ground, like the ground from which it all comes, this will to power, this will to something, this will which it or I wants.
Yeah.
And in the process, I articulate a vision, a goal, a horizon, and it's limited by my capacity to think, by my capacity to envision, to tell stories. And some people tell absolutely extraordinary stories that inspire you to go farther into the unknown with this attention that guides your attention. And Ayn Rand says that that's the purpose of art. That's the purpose of stories. It's to create, to concretize that which your attention wants to move towards.
Right.
That you want to have that be the attention. That way you take actions towards it. That way the self that you create, when you look back at the self and what you've created, that self is in that pattern. And that self becomes more and more of the order that you can use to extend farther into that pattern. And it's this recursive, never-ending, knowledge is always contextual, always improving towards the greater sense of beauty. And that attention. So your turn.
It's interesting what I heard you. I think what I heard you say is that which calls forth my limited understanding of how to put it, right, that calls forth that limitation is the attention that's connected to wanting something that I can't fully articulate, right? This is where I think I like my understanding of what Peterson talks about. I don't think I something about it doesn't intuitively. I think that it's missing something in his interpretation in this, right? Like I think it's right in one sense, but there's another sense in which I don't think it is right, right? Which is this thing about Nietzsche, like his mistake or his Jungian interpretation of Nietzsche's that I think Peterson took on, which is like that we don't create our values, right? We discover our values, right? And we all kind of like, there's a way in which on a practical level, there's a way we can go like, well, on some level, I find out that I like broccoli, right? I don't intend to like broccoli, right? But then there is this way though, where if I don't like broccoli, I can actually
learn to like
it, right? So there's,
as long as it's broccoli, you're not going to be able to do that with, we're not going to be able to do that with gasoline.
Yes, totally. But what I think, where I think he's right is that there is a stratum that's deeper that I think is something that somehow gives the horizon that's beyond what I can come up with, but it's what calls forth what I can come up with.
So again, I'm just going to go back to Rand again, because I think she just put it so succinctly, right? Existence exists. Like existence exists. It exists. It has a nature. It is what it is. Human beings exist. We have a nature. We are what we are. Some things are good for us, and some things are bad for us. That is not chosen. We don't get to choose that. That is given. That is choiceless. But within that, we articulate what we think that is, and then we orient towards the horizon of what we have articulated.
Totally.
Right? And that is chosen, and that is created. It is not discovered. It is not discovered. It is created. Or it's this combination of discovery and creation, right? We're articulating something which exists. This is the scientific project. Like we go out and we say, what is this thing? And we approach it from a perspective, and we work out that perspective until we can say what something is according to that perspective. And that is a creation. It's a creation. Now, if the creation is inconsistent with the thing, if it's incongruent with the thing, then the more we attempt to apply our understanding, our articulation, it will fall apart. And so we can refine our articulation and refine our articulation. So we could say that we're discovering the nature of the reality. We're discovering our values in the sense of we're discovering the nature of that which has us thrive and that which has us shrivel. We're discovering that, but that discovery is a creative process because we're creating new terminology and new art and new understanding, new horizons. And this is like Peterson is going back and like he reads a paragraph and it takes him 2 hours to talk about it because he is reading into it. Now, is he discovering the story of Cain and Abel? Yes, but even more, he's creating it. Like he's saying, here is the nature of sacrifice. Sacrifice is like saying no to the present so you can say yes to the future.
It is interesting. It is really.
And that's one way of interpreting that.
Yeah, totally. Well,
it's a creation. He's discovering like, okay, here's this fundamental thing about human beings is that we learned that we could actually say no to pleasure in the present in order to create more pleasure in the future. And that insight is fundamentally human, and it was a discovery.
It's interesting, like a little bit more of a concrete way of talking about this. It's So I went to art school. Um,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, if you didn't know anything where you were, right, you just fly on the wall and you watch what happened in like the painting studio. A lot of people would say, well, you would see people up on a canvas painting, right? Creating the work. But that's not at all what you actually see. What you see is a bunch of people standing around looking for hours at the painting. Then every once in a while coming up and doing a stroke, or a brush stroke or a line, and then coming back 3 hours looking at it from different angles, right? Because there's this way in which in every person who's done practically anything, that's made anything, but I think artists really understand this, is that the person that went up to the canvas and painted, they had a clear idea based on what they saw of what they were going to do with that mark. But then there's this level at which it never is exactly how they think. And then they stand back and it speaks back. And it's this relationship that I think we call creativity, right? It's this sweet spot in which it emerges. And it's not right to really this is why it's really inaccurate, I think, to look at a piece of art and then just look at it in terms of the self-expression of the artist. It's more like therapy or something to look at it like that. But no, it's like there's the the making of the mark, and then it shows itself what it is, right? And then then you actually kind of look at it from all these angles, and then you go forward, and it is this co-creative creativity that something emerges out of that. And I think that there's something about values around that, of that there's this way in which that there was the values that were expressed in creating the mark and the sensibilities, but you could also say that the painting itself as it shows forth also has its own sensibilities in which the artist is in relationship with and adjusting things. And then it comes out. And that's why I think artists don't, if you ask an artist what they mean in the critical, the art critic sense of the word of what they're painting, they don't want to know. Most of them don't want to know. They're I don't want to talk about that, because what you actually hear the artists talk about are not the base, roughly speaking, they don't want to talk about the big themes and what it all means. What you hear them talk about is pigments and what shape works here. It's a much
And
lower level
how they're representing light.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But somehow artists have this ability to articulate the very beginnings of the unknown of their culture that can end up altering the whole understanding of the culture in a way that the artists didn't necessarily consciously mean or represent, right? I think that there's something about that relationship to attention and in that relationship that somehow opens up to a bigger movement. And I think it's exemplified in the artist. But I also think that it's we can look at our own lives in that way, very much in that way.
And so again, bringing it back to Peterson in the intellectual dark web.
Yep.
To the degree that you stop the artist from doing that, to the degree that you limit, the artist says something, and then they see the results of what they've said, and then that changes them, and it changes what they see as next. So that and in the process, they're developing themselves as an artist through the creation. Now, to the degree that you limit the artist from doing the thing that they think, to the degree that you limit them from saying their articulation, you're thwarting that process through which the culture comes up with things that transform itself. Right. And the individual artist gets to transform through that. I'm a huge fan of saying that if you didn't make a choice, you don't learn from it in the same way. The more you take responsibility for the choices you're making, the faster you learn. If someone else tells you to do something and you do it and it fails, you blame them. You don't spend all of your time learning what there is to learn. because it's their choice, not your choice.
Yeah.
The more you take responsibility for your choices, the faster you learn and you develop your artistic relationship to this thing called existence, right? The more you start to redesign your horizons and the horizon beyond the horizon called telos, like, is it faith in something beautiful or is it faith in hell? Like, do you say that I've got this goal and beyond that goal is meaninglessness? Well, this gets back to this idea of evil. You can look at the dance of what it means to deal with another human being and think about them as a sovereign individual, this unknown thing that can grow, or you can try to control them and make them into an it. You can make them an object rather than a subject.
Right.
And to the degree that you do that and you make yourself an object, that horizon beyond the horizon of horizons, the overall context that the attention is moving towards, right, looks more and more like hell, meaninglessness rather than heaven, meaning and beauty,
Competitiveness,
and wealth.
A friend of mine says, like a religious friend of mine says this really important, this cool thing that I think speaks to this. He says, live and act like everything depends on you. Pray like everything depends on God. And that's what I really I'm hearing you emphasize is like, yes, it's discovered, but it wouldn't be discovered if you didn't make a choice, right?
It's so you might know the story of the preacher who's going around preaching. He comes to a desert in Arizona and there's this beautiful rock garden that this guy has done. And it's this tourist and the guy's all looking around at this rock garden and it's beautiful. And he finally goes up to the person who did it and says, you know, it's amazing what you and the Lord have done here with this rock garden. And the guy says, okay, yeah, I can understand that. You know, like if it wasn't for the Lord providing the rocks and providing the ability to see and all of those things, like there wouldn't be this rock garden. It wouldn't exist. He says, so I can get all of that, but I got to tell you, you should have seen this place when God had it all to himself.
Totally. Yes.
Right. So it's this discovery, but it's the creation. And again, I just got to go back to Rand again. It's the fact of the creation that makes us special.
Yeah.
That's what is distinct about human beings, is that we can consciously and intentionally learn. We can consciously and intentionally take responsibility. We can look at what is reality. I'm actually going to orient towards reality to discover what's real rather than what happens, what's happy. Right? I want to look at what's real, and I'm going to use my best reason to understand it. I can choose to do that, but if I don't choose to do that, it's not going to happen. It's not default. And I can take responsibility both for using my reason to look at reality, to focus on reality, use my best reason, and to take for the choices that I make because of that, for discovering what is good for me, for putting my attention on this question of what is an optimal horizon? What is it that calls me into being? What has me be more alive, thrive more? And then how I respect other people. I can take responsibility for how I treat other people. I can take responsibility for recognizing and honoring their sovereignty without giving up my own. That's a choice that I can make. It's a responsibility I can take. And then I can use all of that to create a realization, a story, an understanding, an artistic ongoing creation of beauty towards which to orient, to look for the horizon, the beyond the horizons. And I can choose that.
Yes.
I can choose that. And it's the fact that I can choose that and my choice to choose that, which is our essential nature. This is what Peterson is talking about. Peterson is saying, it's like, look, you're here. You can fall back into order. You can fall into chaos. Or you can take responsibility for being the hero, and staying attuned to that attention and making your mark and then noticing the result. And start by cleaning your room. Start by organizing the part of your life which is most local to you, where you have the most control, so that you can learn what it's like to actually take control of that. Because it's not trivial. It is hard. It is extraordinarily difficult. And you're going to discover your limitations. But if you do that, you'll get better and better and better. As Ayn Rand would say, you become increasingly rational. You use rational self-interest. You discover what makes your life work, and you get good at it, including how you work with other people. You treat other people with respect, as if they're also sovereigns, that's what it means to be rational. Of course, you're going to treat other people as sovereigns. That's what makes life work. That's what makes trade possible. That's what makes wealth possible. That's the great beauty. The taking responsibility, this is the essence. Like being the hero in that journey. And again, I'm also much more Nietzschean than I am Jungian in this sense. Right? Nietzsche never said that you're going to create your values from whole cloth. He didn't say that you're going to invent your values from nothing.
Right.
That wasn't his thing at all.
Yeah.
His thing is, let's look at reality. And in reality, like, creating something great requires strength. It requires courage. And the things that are truly valuable are the creation. It's the creation that's valuable. The process of creating, that overcoming, that self-overcoming, where you recognize your limitations and you're ruthless with yourself, dealing with your shadows so you can own it and become powerful.
Yeah.
And I think Peterson's message is far more Nietzschean than he suggests. And that might be just because Jung took so much of Nietzsche that it filtered into Jordan Peterson. But again, one more thing about Nietzsche, because he meant so much to me. He's been so important to me. He wrote this book called Twilight of the Idols. And in it, the subtitle is Philosophizing with a Hammer. And people think about it meaning that he's going to take the idols and he's going to smash the idols. That's not what it was at all. He says in his introduction, he says, like, you tap an idol to determine if it's hollow. You use a hammer, like a tuning fork, to determine whether or not the idol actually has real value or whether it's just a hollow thing. And what you want to do with philosophy is to use the hammer to always test for the depth of something. How deep into reality does it go? And your courage, the strength of your character, the value of your character is how much truth you can stand before you break.
Yeah.
Like, how deeply can you look into reality? How deeply can you set your attention on that which goes beyond what you know, so that you're willing to cast aside and transcend and overcome, right, everything that gets in the way of your attention blossoming into its next thing. And that is creative. It is creative. It is not discovery. I mean, it is discovery because you're dealing with reality. But human beings create. That's what's essential. Damn it, I say it. Rant over / rant. Sorry.
It's been a good talk. I have to get going.
Rock on.
Rock on. More coming.
More coming.
Right on.
Bye.